Hello, good morning. I think we'll get started here. I want to thank everyone for showing up this morning. I was quite surprised to see the turnout after last night's events. I thought it might be me and Jonathan here speaking this morning. So thank you all for showing up so early. My name is Ralph Martino. I'm a senior director at Optiv, and I work in the identity access management practice. And my charter there, or my role there, is to build a data access governance organization, helping customers solve the problem with unstructured data and who has access to that data. I think it's no surprise why we're all here, right? We understand why we have the IAM controls, right? We've spent a lot of time and a lot of money governing identities or working to govern identities and working with the business to discover what identities have access to business critical applications. We spent a lot of time then working with the business to ensure that the right folks have the right access to that information. People are still coming in, sorry. And through that, we ensure that these people have the right access for the right business function. But what occurs when the people that have the right access need the information in a different way? A lot of times these people are maybe creating reports for board members or creating different Excel spreadsheets for different pieces of the business. So what happens is they take that information and they pull it out of the application and they export it in different formats. When they export it, it tends to go a little bit like this. We'll take a financial example maybe. If I needed access to data and I needed to create a presentation, I would go into my application, I'd pull the data out, maybe put it in Excel and create a nice pivot table. I would then maybe combine that with some other data elements, make some pretty graphs, move that into a PowerPoint. I might save that locally to my hard drive. I might, I don't know what's going on with this clicker here. I might put that into a SharePoint site to collaborate with other business people. From there, I might take that PowerPoint, put it into a PDF. So right away, I've taken all that information that was governed and controlled, and I put it in a different format. I stored it in various places in the enterprise, and those governance controls and policies didn't move along with that data. So now I have a different risk. And the real risk to an organization tends to be the people. I find it interesting when I think about this slide, because I think about the greater risk, the biggest risk being people, not so much the breaches that happen from system glitches, and not so much the breaches that happen from human error. These tend to be caught rather quick. When someone makes a mistake, they tend to rat themselves out, right? They call the help desk and they tell the people what they've done wrong. I don't know why this thing's advancing, Jonathan, but it keeps on kind of moving. So these have the greatest time to catch the problem, right? The mean time to discovery tends to be small. The mean time to correct it tends to be small, and that reduces the risk in the overall environment for me. But the bigger risk is this malicious user, right? They come in various forms, and it's very hard to detect these people. These people can be compromised accounts. They can be partially compromised, meaning someone's using it for a legitimate business reason, but some malicious user is using it for another reason. And they tend to be the hardest to identify and take the longest to detect and contain. I find it interesting because it is the humans that are our weakest link, yet I don't think we invest enough time in training them and helping them understand the risk. I was in San Diego a few months ago, and we were going through, with some CISOs, internal phishing campaigns. And out of all the CISOs there, I found it interesting that none of them found it important to do these. A lot of them said that if they put "this is a virus" in email, their users would still click on that. And I find that that's interesting because that means we're not investing enough in the people. We're not investing enough in the training to make sure that they don't click on that email. I was in the Navy for 11 years, and I can tell you when I left San Diego and deployed to the Persian Gulf, all we did was train. All I did was train. It didn't matter what time of the day it was. But when we entered the Persian Gulf, that next time that alarm sounded, I knew what to do. It was second nature because it was so much in my face for the time we steamed there. Yet in the organization, we don't do enough time or enough things with our customers, with our users, with the business to ensure they're not clicking on bad emails. And I find that they are our biggest risk, and we do very little in training them on that. When I think about the data is growing at an alarming rate. These are some stats that they have. I find it interesting because the stat here about the 163 zettabytes 2 years ago was only at 160. So they're already readjusting some of the analysis of how much of this data is growing. And I have a little thing here, but my computer froze. I tried to figure out I tried to come up with a way to kind of figure out what's 163 zettabytes. I mean, I kind of get a terabyte, I kind of get a petabyte, but a zettabyte to me was just, I couldn't wrap my head around it. So Google searches, different things, come to find out that 1 zettabyte is 1 billion terabytes. Now, when I think about that data, and you think about the amount of data maybe a Facebook generates, you can see where there is just a lot of content being created and a lot of risk in the organization as your storage is growing and this data is growing with it. A lot of the breaches that occur, better than half of them all occur around this unstructured data environment, or close to half of them. So it's about time we start getting control of this. What's funny is when an organization goes ahead and we think about why is this so risky? We have these identities that, could be a malicious insider, could be just a neglected employee who clicked on the wrong email. And I think about all this growth of data, what's happening in the enterprise is there's just a big accumulation of access, right? I may join an enterprise one day, my role may change in 5 years, yet my access that was granted on day one may not change with my role. And what's funny is in a Ponemon Institute survey of, so I think it's 500 companies with over 1,500 users, over 71% of them said they had access to information they didn't even need. So you see there's a broken control here. When I join the organization, I may need access to information. I'll call the help desk and say, make my account look like this person's account because I need something this person has, but I may not need everything that person has. And the help desk usually just grants that access. But as I move through the organization, as we bring on more people through mergers and acquisitions, my accumulation of access just grows and grows and grows, and the help desk isn't prepared to back out that stuff. There's no processes to take that away. So the risk continues to grow. Again, this data is definitely being used by the right people for the right reasons, but the policies and governance that we put around it through the IAM program are not following it through its life cycle throughout the enterprise. There's also definitely growing number of reasons to start controlling the access now. One of them is definitely intellectual property theft. Most recently, we've probably all heard about the Waymo and Uber battle in court where the person who left Uber went to Waymo stole, I think it was 100,000 records around their intellectual property. I'm a military background, so naturally when China stole the F-35 plans, it was just kind of interesting that the next time you see one of their J-20 strike fighters, it's identical to what our F-35 looks like. So the theft of intellectual property is a real thing, whether that's state-sponsored or even competitors. We continue to see an increase in breaches, medical, law firms, and what's funny is the law firms aren't really taking it seriously enough. An article from Booz Allen indicated that the law firms are the 7th most vulnerable industry there is right now. I think we see that starting with the Panama Papers. We saw some of that occurring. There's going to be a definite rise in class action lawsuits. I mean, I see people just wanting to sue for any other reason. So as personal data leaves, we think we will see an uptick in class action lawsuits. I also see the FTC playing a bigger role in this as more regulation comes down the pipe. We got all sorts of regulation, and a lot of it we kind of all know, but the real one that's really changing the way we manage and handle data is GDPR. The General Data Protection Regulation, which went into effect May 25th of 2018, is really a game changer. It's set out, its boundaries are outside the EU, and really what it's about is having the appropriate technology and process and controls to protect EU citizen resident data no matter where you are. You could be, if you're a US, if you're Apple, and you do business in the EU, those citizens and those residents, that data has certain controls and protections that are not going to be in place from this law. It replaces Safe Harbor. Again, it went into effect on May 25th. There is really no case law yet as to how they're going to enforce this. We're still waiting to see that. but it's really going to have some of the biggest fines we've ever seen. Should they go in there and go to fine you, it's a minimum of 4% of your GDP or 20 million, whichever is greater. Those are some of the biggest fines we've ever seen to date. Again, no case law yet. It's very hard to tell how they're going to enforce it, what they're going to do. We're just kind of waiting to see, and so are some of the lawyers. But I think another problem comes into play here when we're breached or when an event occurs or when an identity gets compromised, it tends to trigger some spending in the enterprise. And ad spending tends to not have a clear strategic alignment with the business. And it tends to deploy a product and technology where you're only getting maybe 10% of the entire use of the technology because you really only solved it for this one piece and never had a strategic plan for it. So we want to ensure that we're taking upfront control of this, and we're doing things up front to not have a reaction should an event occur. A little bit more about GDPR. I'm not going to read this whole sentence to you, obviously. That would be just not good. But what's really funny or really good about this is the last piece, and it's about implementing appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure the appropriate level considering the risk. It's going to, I heard an interview from a lawyer, a European lawyer, her name was Sue Foster, and she mentioned that this is going to be a little bit of a game changer for the United States, because in the United States, it's more of a checkbox, it's more short division. Do you have encryption? Yes. Do you have DLP? Yes. But with GDPR, it's not going to be short division, it's going to be long division. They're going to want to see how you got to that answer. They're going to want to see how you're going to do this. They want to see these pieces working together in a program. And it's really starting to ask some questions in the enterprise. You know, do you know if you have relevant GDPR data? Do you know where the data is? Do you know who has access to the data? Do you have the right controls in place to protect the data? Can you show your work and provide due diligence? And it's these types of things that is going to change the way we think in the US. It's funny because Europeans think about their data a little differently. Here in the US, we'll give our data pretty much to anyone and expect them to control it, maintain it, and protect it, where the Europeans feel it's still their information and they have every right to know what you're doing with it, why you're doing what you're doing with it, why you're doing it, and then ask to be removed from it. And it's a regulation called the right to be forgotten. And these are going to propose some of the biggest challenges in the organization going forward. So it's a challenge, and you guys see this all the time. People, technology, siloed projects, these are all the challenges within the business, within the organization. Again, when I talk about people, we have to think about it in a few different ways. First, there's definitely a shortage of cybersecurity professionals, creating a gap for people to manage technology, to architect solutions. But then there's also this component of the people in the business. With GDPR, there's a big push to find data owners, data stewards. When you think about the people touching your information, you really got to think about changing behavior. And that's tough for folks in security. I find that most folks in security don't come up with an HR background. Some of them have never been product managers. Some of them don't understand that there's a behavior change you want to take place within the people in the organization. And so they forget some of those skills folks in HR have, folks in the training department have. There's a term called ADKAR, and it's a method for changing behavior within the organization. Most of the HR and training people understand this. It stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. So you want to create an awareness amongst your people. You want to give them the desire for change. Then you want to arm them with knowledge, and then give them the ability to enact, and then continually reinforce that and put that in their face. I find that we always miss this part. We talk about people, but we don't understand why we talk about them, and it's often the biggest miss I see going on. It's not just one technology, right? Everything, the technology right now, you get bombarded by vendors saying they solve for this, GDPR, they solve for that, but really you're going to need a couple things working together, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. And then there's just siloed projects within the organization. You know, our IAM team isn't talking to the data team. The DLP team doesn't have a clue who has access. The encryption project doesn't really think about who has access. So I don't understand why you go forward with encryption if you got the access wrong, because if I can still access and decrypt it and I'm not supposed to, that poses a problem in my opinion. So within the organization, you have people challenges, technology challenges, siloed projects, and it really creates a battleground for you to fight. GDPR is really going to have you look across different pillars within the organization. And I think one of the biggest things we don't really talk about much is data handling. Understanding the different ingress points, egress points, understanding the different storage areas, and understanding the specific controls that are in place to help shape how you're going to move forward and how you may need to adjust business processes or security controls to not interrupt the business. So we look at GDPR across these 6 different pillars and areas that you need to be considering and thinking about. But, you know, this is identity. This is all about a little bit of unstructured data, a lot of it driven from the GDPR regulation. And so basically when I think about how I have to manage unstructured data, there's really 6 areas that I need to be thinking about and how I go about it. I have to understand who has access to it, and I have to be able to govern that and ensure the right people have access to this data. I also have to understand how it moves and uses, how it's moved and used within the organization. Does it leave via FTP? Does it come out via an email? Does it support a business process that allows this information to leave the organization? Because of the threat of insiders and compromised accounts, I need to start understanding what baseline behavior is. I need to be able to detect an anomaly when it occurs. When Ralph accesses a file every day from his home in San Diego at 9 o'clock in the morning, is it kind of weird that he did it from Tokyo on a Tuesday? Maybe. Maybe I was on vacation, or maybe not. Maybe there was a reason my account might have been compromised and there's a need for investigation. With all that, you need an incident response team and processes and procedures within there so they understand what to do when these alerts occur. And then you have to have a life cycle. A lot of people, you know, they read the news, they understand when breaches occur that the potential risk is really around the data that hasn't been touched in 20 or 30 years. So, you know, we have to really start considering the data that's on our subsystems used by the business that has aged and we're not doing anything about it. So having a life cycle. And then finally, the last lever we really can pull when we're trying to manage and protect unstructured data is protecting it at rest. And that traditionally just means encryption, right? But this is an identity conference, and I do speak about DAG, and I think that that's the right place to start, is with access and who has access. So, you know, we think there's a real good process you could take to go through and start reducing risk in the organization. A lot of this is about first assessing and discovering where the risks are, right? And I think a lot of folks get caught up in this classification piece. They spend time trying to figure out what the right classifications are for the organization, but I think we all know those items that get us in trouble, right? GDPR, PII, PHI, PCI. So I think we need to start just classifying the obvious and do some discovery as to where it is and who has access to it in the organization. Afterwards, after we discover it, we understand who has access, we need to start to find a data owner. And this is typically someone who is in the business. Traditionally in organizations, IT is a steward of data, and that is going to have to change. It's the business's asset, and we need to allow them to start controlling this a little bit better. So understanding who has access, who needs access, and then working with the data owner to kind of start scaling this access down and getting to that least privilege model. And then, of course, having those right retention requirements so that you're not a data hoarder. When I think about this, these are some quick and easy wins within the organization to reduce risk. If I can identify an asset that has critical information in that hasn't been touched by the business in 15 years, I could probably make a decent argument to get it off that storage subsystem and thereby reducing the risk in the organization. Furthermore, when I have the data owner, I can do a lot more things with the data owner. With the data owner, I can maybe talk to them about starting to take ownership of the data to a level where they're actually providing access and revoking access versus it going to the help desk. So there's immediately a productivity gain right there, right? They're no longer having to call the help desk who has no idea what the business process is for this, why this user needs access to it, often calls a manager to get approval, and then the access sits. But what happens if the business now, the data owner can grant that access via a simple email, and maybe it's just for a time bound. They just need it for an hour or 2 hours to submit one presentation. I no longer need to give them access to the entire system and never remove it. I can literally grant them access, period of time, and have the system revoke that access. So once I find that data owner, I can start doing things to get some productivity back at the IT help desk. Not only with the data owner, I can start talking to them to help them enable the right DLP policies. A lot of times we implement DLP, and we go out, we do our months of monitoring and months of trying to understand how the data moves, and we think we got it right because we spent 9 months, we put in a policy, and month 11, SVP needed access or to do something, we blocked him, we had to remove the policy, and DLP now has a bad reputation in the business because I've impacted them. It's hard to restart it. The business is trying to figure out, have I gotten ROI out of this product? Why did we buy this product? So again, I can work with someone in the business and ask them, does this go out via email? Yes, it goes out to a business partner. Okay, those policies can go to DLP and say, well, before I send this email to this business partner, make sure that link has TLS enforcement, right? Or the data owner may say, no, this document should never leave the firewall. Now I can put the right technology controls in place to reinforce its movement and use. So as you see, back to that house diagram, I need a couple different things working together here. I have a DAG tool helping me manage access and govern access controls, but it's not going to do anything to stop movement and use. I need a DLP tool to do that. So I need to have programs that think broadly across what I'm trying to do to manage the problem. And that's really where I think the data owner's value comes in. Least privilege model, and ensuring I have the right movement and use policies, and then if we can really turn the corner, getting that productivity suck out of the help desk and put it back in the owner of the business. Lastly, continue to lock it down, continue to have visibility. A lot of times, the data that's in Ariba or your financial app, when I export that to Excel, it's still the same data. So why is it that I'll recertify access on the app once a quarter, but this information I don't care about who has access to it? So it's combining these, it's the same data, giving them a portal to go to where they can do the attestations, giving them one portal to kind of self-manage the information going forward. And that's really what I really want to achieve at the end of the day. So when I think about, hey, I have a whole bunch of unstructured data, where do I start? I never want to start with DLP because I think there's so much more value in getting to a data owner, someone in the business who can help me really start scaling down that access and then put in the appropriate controls to minimize its movement and use. And I think when I think about GDPR and the fact that I need to have those appropriate technical controls, and I go back to that house and I think about what are the levers I'm going to pull in the organization. Which ones do I need to pull first and second? Which ones do I need to put together? Maybe your program needs you to focus on protecting that rest first. Then don't forget you still have to do other things, because even if you have it encrypted and protected when it's sitting on the SAN or sitting on the NAS, if I have access to it and I can still decrypt that, and I'm not supposed to have access to it, have I done any value by encrypting the data? And so I think when I think about this, I always want to start with DAG. I always want to start with getting to the who has access to the data, and then finding that person in the business who can help me determine who should have access, because it's not going to be the help desk. Closing, I would say, it's going to take a lot more than just one tool. It's going to take a little bit more than just a couple bodies. It's really thinking about it a little broader. How do I want to change the behavior in the business? How will I change the behavior in the business? Starting with access controls. If I just take 2 more seconds to talk about this one topic, because I'm very passionate about it, because I just don't think we do enough about the humans. I find that we aren't CISOs, young CISOs, aren't partnering enough early in the organization with the right teams, right? How many people here, just raise your hands, were HR, product managers, or training people that ran training departments? Great. How many of you basically came up through technology? And so a lot of us don't really understand how to change people. Security professionals, I find, don't really understand adoption. They're going to buy a tool, never really thinking about how the business is going to touch that tool. So I think as young CISOs and young security professionals, partnering early with the right people in the business will help ensure success. And these people are usually your training department, your HR department, the people who are in charge of people change management. So I think that that's where I would start. That understanding my partnerships and what I want to achieve, and then I start worrying about the technology and the other items. And so I'd leave you with that. I want to thank you for your time, and if there are any questions, we'll open it up for questions. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.